there's a lot of hurdles that people don't even understand.
And you know, now too, I think as this whole industry is evolving and, you know, not only in California, but the rest of the country and the world, it's becoming harder and harder for the smaller operators to make it. And, you know, I kind of always use this analogy, and I think it's kind of played out, but like, you know, being a professional athlete, there's not a lot of professional athletes, right? To really get to the top,
Right.
whether it be the NBA or baseball or whatever, you're effectively an elite athlete. And you've got to, you know, really rise to the top. And I think that's what's happening with cannabis now, where before, especially during COVID, you know, like pack prices were a lot higher. It was a lot easier if you.
Oh yeah, it was easy to win at the game, and it was also from the outside looking in. People who weren't in it yet thought like, why am I missing out on this?
It's a cash cow, right? And again, I think that was way more so true, you know, then when the way prices were in the whole industry was, you know, quality didn't necessarily, quality still mattered, but I don't think there was as big of a spread as to what there is now.
Also, whenever prices are high, there's a buffer for when lack of quality, when you have a bad harvest, when you have, you know, a percentage of the batch just isn't as nice as the rest for whatever reason. Yeah, so there isn't a variance, whereas now it's like there is no margin. Like I remember our projections at my grow, we were looking at it as long as we're at 1,500, we're profitable, you know, 1,500 to sell price, and we have room, cushion room. And that's what we were thinking way back then when prices were, you know, 3,200, 2,800. It was like, okay, 1,500 is a reasonable, below average price. And now it's like, that's high.
you know, but I think that's just the natural evolution of the business, right? Obviously being illegal, it pushes prices high. And especially now, I think, you know, look, there is the potential for significantly larger margins than traditional business. But the reality is, as it becomes, you know, more regulated, more legalized effectively, and federal legalization, you're going to start to see a lot of really big money pour in. And the way that the business is now, I don't think it's going to look like that in 5 years, 10 years,
right?
Or effectively post federal legalization. And again, it's so crazy me growing up in the East Coast, you know, seeing what the whole weed industry or weed scene was like back then, and then coming out to California as early as, you know, 07, 08, kind of during the heyday of like all the Prop 215.
Right.
I had a Prop 215 grow up in Northern California.
Right. Same here.
So it's changing and evolving so much more rapidly now than it ever has been. And I think part of that is we're starting to weed out some of the guys that can't operate as well, because
absolutely,
it's, you know, in terms of from a cultivation perspective, it's not so much about quality, it's also about quantity
and efficiency. And
absolutely.
And it's literally your your cost to produce needs to be. So I know just from, if you're a really good cultivator, off books, you could potentially get your cost down to about $450 and have a good enough quality to sell it reasonably easy at a fair market value. Conversely, for a licensed grow, that has to be about $750. Unless maybe if you're probably in SAC, where it's, from my understanding, the cheapest electric cost, but you could possibly get it down in the 6 range. But it's very dependent on, like I said, where you're at with electric and exactly where your operation efficiency is, because you're shaving pennies there. And like your example with the pros, it's like saying, you know, I'm not really into sports, but whatever an average of whatever, you know, an average rebounds, average free throw percentage, whatever, I'm sure a pro average is going to be elite compared to an amateur average, even at college level, you know?
You may think about golfers. I don't know if you golf or not.
Yeah, exactly. Great example. And it's like you're shaving off hairs of hairs to really compete and to even stay alive. And it couldn't be more true in cannabis and licensed cannabis.
You know, I think we're seeing who can perform in this market. And again, you touched on that cost per pound. Yeah, if you're a really good indoor cultivator, you need to be in that $600 to, you know, $750 range, because, you know, we're getting to the point now, especially we're starting to see in the California market, a lot of these brands wholesaling for good brands wholesaling for sub $15.
Right.
And really trying to pump out volume. And I don't think, I'm coming from a headspace where only a couple of years I can remember brands getting $35, $37.50 for, an eighth or a jar.
Right.
Now we're talking about $12, like actually pretty good
weed. Yeah.
And it's a whole different landscape than what I think we've kind of, and I think that's kind of the mindset of a lot of these legacy guys too, is that, just because it was this way, we're entitled to be here, or, things are changing so much. If you want to find whatever space, whatever seat you want at the table, you're gonna have to change and evolve with what's happening in this whole industry.
It's always been like that. I've been out in the wholesale market here in California since 2004, and every single year I can map it back to where it's always a different par for the course every year. And there's been stretches of years where I literally shifted away from doing any sort of wholesale flower, which has always been my go-to. To where there's, right before legalization, a lot of trim demands into legalization, and then all of a sudden it dipped, and then flower came back, and COVID came back heavy.
Crazy. It was wild.
And yeah, and that lasted for a while, especially the stimulus money propped all that up basically artificially. And so my whole take on things from the economy standpoint to also the cannabis industry is almost an echo of it. It's almost like a replication of it. Is what I feel happened is the stimulus money pumped up the economy, which then had the surplus of money. So then people are willing to spend extra money on expensive weed more often, kept prices higher, but then it also gave larger surpluses of money to other people that then wanted to quote unquote reinvest it. And then they started getting into, even if it's small scale, just coming out to California, buying some pounds, and whether it would be successful for them or not, they had that cushion of stimulus money to kind of bounce back from or test the waters with. Whereas now it's like the only people left in this market are the people that know what they're doing, and there's really no room for error. And that goes from the guys buying 5 pounds to the guys buying 500 pounds or growing it, and I know growers right now that are struggling to just keep their lights on. And granted, I feel like it's coming out of that right now, where supply is actually, prices are getting a little bit of traction, but as well as I do, the buyers were beating the prices down to that $700, $800, $900 price range for indoors the past year and a half.
Yep.
And like I just mentioned, from a licensed grow, you basically can't even be profitable at that. And and the amount of profit, if you do squeeze out, you're just lucky to kind of, that profit isn't going in anyone's pocket at 800, 900. That's literally like building out the next room so they can grow more weed so that they can keep up with the price drop. You know what I mean? So it's like, there's pennies.